Welcome to the AskBYS Podcast, a monthly podcast brought to you by Bainbridge Youth Services and its supporting sponsors. AskBYS Podcast connects parents to professionals that can provide support, education, and resources on a particular topic in parenting. The speaker's words and opinions are their own and do not represent the policies or opinions of BYS. I am your host, Jessica Crook, and I'm here with Milagro Castilleja as our producer. We are recording live at the Media Arts Studio at Barn, the Bainbridge Artisan Resource Network. Today's parent guest is Bainbridge Island resident Kathy Clifford.
Hi, I am really happy to be here. I'm a resident of Bainbridge for about 8 years, and I have a daughter, Kaya, and she is about 17 and a half years old. So we have been on island since she was just in the middle of 4th grade, and she is currently working on her high school completion.
Wonderful, welcome. And our professional guest, Dr. Jillian Worth.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jillian Worth. I'm a family physician. I've been on the island for 24 years. I work for Virginia Mason, and I'm the medical director at the Virginia Mason Franciscan Health Bainbridge Island Medical Center. And I've always had a tender spot in my heart for adolescent care, but I'm an all-around family doc.
Fabulous. Welcome. Today's episode is a conversation around the adolescent brain and its development. With that, I will hand that over to you, Kathy.
All right. Thank you. So, Jillian, the first question I have for you is around distinguishing the normal characteristics and stages of brain development relative to distractibility and executive functioning. And the purpose of that question is because my daughter Kaya has ADHD, and she was diagnosed when she was about 14 and a half. She's now 17 and a half. And while she's maturing in many ways, she's much more collaborative and open and willing. It's still difficult, and I'm interested to know how her brain development between that age of 14, 15, and this period of time and forward might change, and how that might affect her abilities to function.
Great question. So first, it's important to understand how the brain develops in all of us. So every human being, and animals too, but we have a bigger frontal brain, develops from the back to the front. And so what's in the back is all the basic brainstem stuff, so you can breathe and you can swallow and you can digest food and you can walk. Then we start to develop our emotional cortex, which is the amygdala in the middle of the brain. But the problem with adolescents, it's not their fault, is that their middle brain develops before their frontal brain develops. The middle brain is impulsivity, activity, movement, emotion, but it doesn't have anybody in charge yet. So you can just imagine, I always envision a bunch of remember when the kids were in 3rd and 4th grade and they played soccer? Mm-hmm. And there would just be 20 kids all crowded around the ball with nobody organizing anything. It's like that in an adolescent brain. There's just no real organization around 10 to 13 as they're really coming into adolescence. Mm-hmm. Once they get their big hormone bath, they start to develop the front of their brain a little, but they're not done developing till they're about 26 to 28, it turns out. Mm-hmm. I always joke that explains my first marriage, but here we are. So what happens with the brain is as they develop from back to front, they've got impulsivity and they've got emotion and they've got ideas, which is why if you ask a group of 12-year-olds to come up with ideas for a podcast, you'll get 100 answers. If you ask a group of 28-year-olds, you'll get about 5 answers, and that's because that young brain doesn't have that frontal cortex saying no, 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 helping you with your executive function. It's just pure sort of dopamine. Mm-hmm. So for your daughter, for example, ADHD, especially in a girl, they're not necessarily as physically ADHD and distractible and moving like the boys who are bouncing around the room, but they actually emotionally feel really fragile as an ADD girl because being quiet and keeping quiet, they're hoping no one notices that they're distractible. As they get a little bit into their 18 to 24-year frame, they'll start to develop that frontal lobe and they'll start to have more executive functioning, which is why for girls, once they get into college years, typically that age group, they can start to have a little more of a handle of their ADD. But in that adolescent, hormone phase, it's really hard.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That explains a lot. That explains a lot. And gives me some hope that that's going to get stronger. Yeah. Great. Well, let's see. The next question I have is how the adolescent brain developing happens in terms of that logical, rational thinking and realism, or is that really more of a function of that innate personality and the characteristic traits that they're born with over a lifetime? So Kai is an introvert. She's very introverted, but she's also, externally a leader and take charge, and a musician and a creative, and very, very in front of audiences. Loves it, comfortable. It's like breathing, and yet she's completely socially awkward. She is isolated at home, has almost no friends, and plays music and teaches herself music and teaches herself along the way. So she's a creative, and she's very smart, but that logical, rational thinking part is challenging for her. I don't know how much of it is like boredom, distractibility, not interested, or anything else. So I'm wondering how much of it is just her innate who she is, her personality, and how much of it is attributed to brain development and also, neurodiversity or mental health challenges.
That's a great question. Well, first of all, she sounds like an amazing kid. And I will say this, I've been on this island for almost 25 years, and I've taken care of a broad spectrum of teenagers. I've had in my own family, my older kid is 27 and went through every possible challenge short of drugs through all of high school and is flourishing. But I've watched a lot of kids really, I say, wobble through high school age and in their young adulthood, and then they kind of find their way. You always envision that bird that's sort of figuring it out, and then it soars. In that wobbly phase, though, they can really look like they're going to fail. And I think we as parents and as a physician, my job is to just say, I'm steady with you wherever you are, and to understand that the gifts that your daughter has are probably what's going to be her strength in her future, and to really harness those gifts. If she's great at music, she might need school to be kinetic. She might need to have music playing. Whereas for you, that might be the worst way to learn. She might need school to be in person with a really dynamic professor and not online video sitting back and bored, because a lot of the ADHD kids cannot learn that way. They literally can't. The other thing to think about is it might be personality, but what we have to remember is this is a diverse group of humans. Think about the people you know in your life and your work, right? I think about the doctors in my office and the nurses and the staff. It's a really diverse group of brains. Each person has something they bring to the table. They all can't work in the same pathway in the same way. And same with kids. They can't all learn, with a frontal lecture and with a teacher in front of the class, even if it's the most amazing teacher in the world. That brain may not learn that way. That brain may need to be in a kinetic chair. That brain might need to record it and write notes later. That kid might need to be in the back of the room walking around. And so we have to allow for the differences in learning style, because I think we've created a system that says you're going to learn this one way, and that's really hard for lots of kids. So hopefully finding a way for her to learn will make her feel more successful. The other thing to think about with brain development is that, the brain of an adolescent, like I said earlier, that amygdala, that dopamine, they want to rush in any way. That's what their brain is looking for. It's like this, for boys especially, and for ADHD girls similarly. You can imagine in their brain, which is why social media is so dangerous, there's a whole wall to the right of their head all day long that's this video game with sex and drugs and nudity and noise and loud music and fireworks going off. And then we, the adult, are like Charlie Brown's teacher. And so I feel for kids during that age group, because you watch them space out. And even in my office, I'll be talking to a 14-year-old boy. I feel like we're engaged, and then they just drift away. And where they are is that movie's playing. And I am not that interesting compared to the movie.
Yes.
So be really mindful when you're trying to talk to her about these important things, that it's not when she's at the end of a hard day or in the middle of a frustrating moment, because she's not going to hear you.
Yes.
Just like you wouldn't hear someone at 10 o'clock at night when we older folk are going to sleep, right? They're wide awake. So if I'm going to have a hard conversation with my 19-year-old, for example, it's not going to be when I'm done with my day and he's just waking up. We have to meet in the middle at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because that's when my brain can still be on and his brain's waking up, and then we'll have a really constructive conversation. So that's adolescence.
Yeah. Is that common of most adolescent brains, the time spectrum you're talking about? I mean, is that generally because
their brains wake up late and go to bed late, and our brains wake up early and go to bed early. It's actually wild. If you look at sleep patterns in adolescents, their natural sleep cycle is really from midnight to 8 or 9 a.m. Our natural sleep cycle is 9 or 10 to 6. And all of us who are parents remember the little kids, went to bed at 6 or 7 and woke up at the crack of dawn, and you as an adult were like, oh my God. But as you get older, that's more natural for you too. But adolescent brains, there's actually a 1 or 2 hour shift that happens right as the hormones kick up. That's truly changes their sleep phase. So their sleep phase starts 2 or 3 hours later than ours does by the time they're in the heat of adolescence, which is why they're wide awake when you're literally falling asleep. The joke in our house was that my husband would say our kids were 8 years apart because we were hybrided a family. And so we would have the young one would be chirping, crash around 7, be wide awake at 6, standing by the side of my bed talking, mom, 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 mom. The other one, around 9 or 10, as we were falling asleep, would be in our room saying, and suddenly wanting to talk about all the important stuff, and we'd both be falling asleep, and then we couldn't get them up in the morning. And so it was a little bit of a challenge to have 8 years apart.
Yeah.
Now they're great because they're 19 and 27 and they both sleep in and they can kind of hang out with each other. But but that's really normal, which is part of why school systems like ours that at least shifted the start time for adolescents. Best thing they could have ever done. The grades go up. And the teachers are happier at the 8:30 class because there's actually brains in the room, not just sleeping teenagers with their eyes open.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, my next question has to do with, as a parent, how do I discern from a brain development perspective or anything else, the difference between kind of normal teen narcissism, just meaning, and I think that word is overused, but, their self-interest, self-focus, the normal part where they just think about themselves. They don't do, it's not that she doesn't put her dishes in the dishwasher because she's trying to be defiant. It's because she's just expects it to be handled for her, right? I mean, that's a simple example. How do you distinguish between what's kind of normal in that self-focus and anything where it might be problematic? Like, what are there signs that you look for?
That's
anything
a great
that would
question.
distinguish?
So the joke in medicine that we say behind the scenes in child psychiatry is that every teenager at some point looks like they're borderline bipolar and narcissistic, and then one by one those things fall off, except for the rare exception, right? So they seem borderline because borderline is black and white thinking, right? It's one day they love you, one day they hate you. It's alienating themselves and then suddenly being extroverted. That's borderline, like out of a textbook. So teenagers are sort of temporarily borderline. They're also temporarily narcissists because, as we said, that first part of their brain is not the future thinking, how is this impacting other stuff? That's why you see college kids will get really into activism, but high school kids are less likely to be into activism because they're not thinking about the world as much. Right. They're thinking about themselves. Right. Same in a family unit. They're not thinking, how is it going to make my mom's day better if I do the dishes? They're thinking, I ate my food, I put my dishes down, and I'm on to the next thing. And it's not about, I don't want to help you. It's, I don't even notice you. Yeah. And that's brain development. And so there are some exceptions. There's some kids that, for whatever reason, come out really moral, really focused. Their brain probably develops on a different pathway, and maybe they've got more frontal lobe stuff going on than the other kid, and because each kid develops at their own pace, just like we saw them, some kids got taller quicker and some were later, and that just does this jigsaw all the way till they're a little bit older. And, get 24, 26-year-olds in a room, and you'll see really, on average, executive functioning, ability to future think, ability to understand why. In a family, it's nice when everybody does their thing. Yeah. Like, I just took a trip with my 2 kids, and my husband and I went to New York City for a wedding, and the older one, who will admit to this, when he was young, he's transgender, so when he was a she and then he had a second puberty, it was like a second round of arguments about, can you just please not put dying food in your bedroom? Because now we have mice, and that's gross, and I don't want mice. And so he was laughing because in the hotel room, now that he's 27, his side of the room was perfectly clean. And all of his stuff was in his suitcase. And my 19-year-old, everything was all over the floor, and they've flipped. And it's because the 19-year-old isn't thinking, how annoying is it for the other person you're sharing a room with to have stuff, because he just is 19. Yeah. He's a very nice kid, but it's not even in his worldview. The 27-year-old whose brain finished fusing cares about how the room is. So they get there. And some of them slowly, but they get there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've seen progress in the development just in the last year, really from 16 to 17. There's been a shift. But yeah, that's really helpful. So along those lines, in terms of having conversations with your kids or being able to engage and interact with your kids, part of the friction and tension for me is that I'm very, aside from brain development, logical and rational and, questioning and very critical thinking, period, all the time. Of course, she is a feeler, and she's a teenager and narcissistic, and highly emotional. So she will watch the world and watch the news, particularly social media, but, stuff related to politics or anything else. And she'll bring the conversation in, but she brings it in with an emotional reaction and wrong information or just limited information. And then I will always start questioning, where did that come? She'll try to be communicating with me and connecting with me, right? Telling me how she thinks and what she knows and what's going on. She's passionate about it. And I immediately will come back with questions. What's the source? Don't be limited to the source, and that kind of thing. And so it's kind of a disconnect. So do you have any, advice of how to meet in the middle there? Or, and I guess to what you're talking about, what I'm hearing is she'll be able to think critically a little bit later, so maybe I just drop it and just listen to her go on and on with her.
Well, that's hard as a parent, right? And as a parent and as a physician, my kids will tell you that it's hard for all of us. It doesn't matter how many lectures I give and how much counseling I give for other families with their kids. You're still going to make errors because you're a human being and you're going to react as if it's another person in the room, and kids look like adults. So you're having an adult conversation, you think, until you're not, right? Yeah. Kids are going to hear what we say with a critical eye, because we are one of their most important sort of thought leaders, whether we like it or not. How we behave, our body language is really well interpreted by young people. Even the ones that are stuck on the screen all day still can at least interpret how we're behaving. So, for example, my younger son just told me that I should have pushed him harder in high school. And I said, are you kidding me? Here I was trying not to be a helicopter mom. And he said, no, you could have, and I definitely pushed him hard, so it was funny. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, there'd be moments that you'd start to push me and you'd back off. And I said, you can't win, because the other one said, we always push too hard. And so in the end, I think the answer is understand where they are developmentally, be really mindful that what you say is heard and kind of amplified, like across the stage. And so that emotional reactivity is part of their development. Yeah. But also that it's very short-lived. So if you had an adult conversation where there was this much sparks flying, you'd think, that person hates me. I'm not going to hang out with them. But with your kid, you're going to have that sparks flying, and what we need to do is hold tight and kind of navigate the storm. And then when they come back with what you could say is, wow, you're really passionate. And instead of what are your sources and questioning, instead it could be, I would love to read where you got that. I want to read that article. That is wild. I've never heard that perspective. And then what we're doing by saying that is we're saying I am validating you.
I'm curious.
I see you, and not right away what we typically do in our adult relationships, which is wait a minute. We use our, kind of our very advanced emotional intelligence and go right to, let's talk that through. They don't want that. They want to be novel and new and explore. And it's like they're checking that boundary. Yeah. And the best thing we can do is go, okay, tell me about that. Tell me more. As opposed to, like, how was your day at school? Yeah. My least favorite thing that we ask kids, we all do it. Yeah. I've done it too. It's, tell me something about your day. Yeah. Or, hey, any interesting conversations today? Or did you read anything that you just thought was like, whoa? Or you can model it, right? You get home from a hard day, and the first thing you do is open a bottle of wine and complain. You're saying this is how we cope with stress. You saying to your 12-year-old, you know what, I had a hard day. I need to go take a walk. Who wants to walk with me? Yeah. Or who wants to veg out on a silly movie because I had a hard day and I need to come down. You're modeling, you're talking about how you manage your emotions. Goes so much further for kids if we're talking about how we get through hard stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about, because part of Kaya's journey through the struggles and challenges socially and with anxiety, she's pretty severe anxiety, and that's kind of come all the way through life for her. And she's had some significant traumas, real traumas, as a young child. She found the use of weed when she was at the high school, and it was really easy in her freshman year, easy to find. She was kind of a misfit, didn't find her group to click with, so she was with kind of the misfit group. And in the misfit group, there were cheerleaders, and there were jocks, and there were stoners, and there were all of it. She's very non-judgmental, and she just ended up hanging out with the misfits, and ultimately tried weed, and then used it, and it was the vaping variety, and on that went, to a lot of acting out, a lot of bad behavior, and a lot of struggle. So my question is, how I've learned a lot. She's now sober and not using, but how does, in particular, from your experience, the vaping forms of THC really affect the brain and the development of the brain? I've heard lots of things, but what is your experience and perspective on the impact it has on the adolescent brain?
So that's a great question. So a lot of parents ask me, when is it safe for my kid to use pot? Because it's everywhere. We're in a legalized state. Even if we're not, it's everywhere. Kids are going to try stuff, right? Part of the reason they try it is that same thing I said in the beginning, which is that they've got this brain going, experiment, try. I don't have anybody policing myself yet. Mm-hmm. The challenge we have is, imagine we're now in the middle of molding something. We're about to make a sculpture. And let's say, as we're making the sculpture, we take a chunk out. Well, now we can't really make it round. What happens with any kind of substance, especially pot, especially in the early part of synaptic development, we now know that whole synaptic connections just don't ever happen. Mm-hmm. And so heavy use of drugs in the younger age, what I always say to kids is, you're going to do stuff, maybe you'll be the lucky one that won't. Wait as long as you can. Mm-hmm. Because the minute you do it, especially if it becomes regular use, you are going to cause a change in the way that your neuroplasticity or your brain development goes. Mm-hmm. Now, that may make a creative person think they're more creative, but it certainly does not help anxiety. It actually makes it worse. And we now know why. It's that the synaptic connections are actually pared down in kids that use a lot of pot. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to get that same synaptic connection. So that emotional reactivity continues on. Mm-hmm. And so what they're doing is almost prolonging their adolescence. Mm-hmm. And they're going to suffer. So kids that smoke pot occasionally, I'm not saying go for it, but it's not the end of the world. But a kid that becomes a regular user of anything, alcohol can do a similar thing. Mm-hmm. You're actually causing your synapses to pare down in a totally uneven way. The natural brain development is that the synapses that we have billions of them, and then we get to millions. But that's a very specific pattern that's supposed to emerge as we go through adolescence. We throw drugs in there and lack of sleep. Those two things, and then now we see social media. We are actually seeing brain changes that we can look at in a functional MRI that show parts of the brain that don't develop properly. It's real. And so I tell every kid I take care of and know, and family, friends, guys, as late as you can be. And then if you're going to do it carefully. And vaping, I just hate from start to finish. I would take any vaping company on, in a fist fight. Because what we're seeing is we're damaging kids' lungs, it's hitting them harder, and it's such a concentrated form of THC. It's nothing like when we were in high school and college and young. It's so much more potent that it's a hallucinogen. And so we're seeing changes in all sorts of brain portions that we're now able to see on these functional MRIs that was very different than someone who smoked a joint once in a blue moon when they were young, 20 or 30 years ago, even 10 years ago. Yeah. So that's the challenge, and that's probably why she became addicted, is that it's so much more addictive now.
Yeah, super challenging.
I'd also throw a plug in for sleep. I think that this generation, especially because they can't turn off their damn phones, and we have to model that too, I will admit, but they are so addicted to that screen, and it makes sense. That's a dopamine hit. Every time you scroll, that's another dopamine hit. Seeing that someone liked your post, that's a dopamine hit. So it's as addictive as cocaine and sugar, which are the two most addictive things in the world, and now we know social media is right up there because that dopamine hit keeps hitting you, and then you're trying to tell your brain, now go to sleep. And so the kids with their phones in their bedrooms that are still on, I want them to self-police it, but they kind of can't because that dopamine hit's going to keep hitting. And so then they're going to go to sleep, and their sleep pattern's dysregulated. It's also missing a chunk, and so they're not getting their 8 to 10 hours. They're getting 4 to 6. And then we wonder why they can't pay attention. So I think that's all a big part of this. This can't just be one thing.
Yeah. How much sleep does a teenager need? I know it can be somewhat variable, but you just said 8 to 10 hours.
I mean, 10 is ideal. That's the irony.
For how long? 17, 18, 19?
So as they get into their later adolescence, they usually pare back down naturally. If you put a kid, and we don't do this but ethically, but those studies have been done over the last 50 years, where you put humans in a dark room like this studio and you turn off the lights and you don't have natural sunlight, you have no cues, the body will sleep 8 to 10 hours. That's just our natural way, right? Without any stimuli from the sun or the TV or lights or whatever. Adolescents probably more like 10. But they naturally start to come back to about 8 when they're about 17, 18, 19, depending on the kid. A lot of kids will say, that's not what I do. I sleep 5 hours a night during the week, and I sleep 14 hours on the weekend, 2 nights in a row, and I catch up, and it's just not true. We know there's no such thing as catching up a sleep deficit. So I think kids, however we can help them time manage, and sometimes that's the boundary we have to set as a parent is, listen, I know you think you've got it all handled, but especially my overachiever kids that stay up till 2 or 3 to finish work, we now know that whatever work they finished, if it's something they have to remember, that's not getting imprinted in their brain because they haven't gone to sleep early enough for it to go to the part of the brain that will then register it as a memory. It'll just be memorized and lost. And the same for adults. We've got to get that sleep if we want to perform.
Well, that's really good to know, like that the memory's attached to sleep.
Like I told my son the minute I was reading, there's a really good book called Why We Sleep, and I was reading it last year, and my son was in finals in his freshman year of college. He's a sophomore now. And I said, oh my God, tell all your friends, like, don't cram. Just go to sleep at midnight for that hard test. And then wake up early if you want to read your notes. Because if you go to sleep, whatever you learned will actually get from the first part of your brain that kind of takes it on, and then get it up into the deep cortex where it'll actually be imprinted, and you will remember it better in the test. If you only cram it and then miss sleep, you'll actually do much worse on the test. And it's been proven. There's all these great studies that show that these young people that cram, it doesn't work. Which explains, I remember that in med school. You know, we'd stay up all night, and then you're like, why didn't I do well? Well, your brain actually never imprinted the information. It just sort of held it in the temporary memory bank, and then it just goes away.
From a brain development or perspective, is there a better time for an adolescent brain or an adolescent to be doing homework or trying to study, particularly if it's subject matter that they're not, really excited about, and trying to do that in a traditional way? Read, take notes, prepare for a test?
Great question. So I would say mid-morning or late morning is their best time, and the second best time is right when we're eating dinner, like evening. So it's like the worst for families, but it's absolutely what adolescents. So think of an adult brain. Our brain kind of keys up 6 or 7 a.m. Our cortisol surges. We have the most awake alert time somewhere in that earlier morning, and then again early afternoon. And we're done by about 6. Like if we try to imprint new memories, it doesn't work as well. Adolescents shifted by 2 hours. So it's late morning, late afternoon, early evening is when their brain sort of wakes up and starts to have a much better, easier time processing. And it doesn't usually work with the adult they're living with schedule because it's absolutely off by 2 hours. So that right as you're fading, they're going to, I remember that with my older kid, sitting there doing math homework at 9 at night, and I am done, I'm cooked. And they're just getting their energy up. And so we were a total mismatch. There was a lot of arguing because I was like, oh my God, I need to go to sleep. And this kid is just turning on their brain. So for them, I'd say late morning, dinner time-ish. That's their best time to learn and imprint.
That's great. That's good. Thank you. That's awesome. Learning so much great stuff. Let's see. I guess the broader question is just, and you've answered it really quite a bit, around how best to support our adolescents from a brain development perspective. So anything else that you would suggest, in a broad general sense, like you've talked about sleep and structure, and anything else from a physiology standpoint that we can support better in our adolescents?
I'd say nutrition we didn't talk about. So nutrition's a big one, and I think part of what's also fascinating about a teenage brain, they're fascinating creatures, and again, not their fault. That dopamine thing means they're going to crave sugar. They're going to crave junk food. It's not their fault. They're going to crave caffeine in a different way than I remember ever craving it as a kid, but it's so long ago. They are going to crave fast food because it's fast and it's sort of not important to them. So not obsessively, because I think we can go the other way too much and create eating disorders. I see that all the time. We can model sort of good nutrition. We can talk about it in our own experience. We can try to get water in their body and not juice, and really try to not have them get addicted to caffeine young, because then it'll stay. We can try to really make sure that there are choices available that are just healthier for them. And it's going to be hard to pin down a kid at 6 or 7 for a really good dinner with the family, if that's your modeling, because that's not when they're necessarily hungry. They come home from school ravenous, a lot of kids, and so they've already kind of ruined their appetite for dinner, and a lot of families complain about that. I'd say, still sitting together, modeling that we all take a break, if that's possible in your family. If you're, a family with 17 sports and kids going here and there, Have a cooler in the car. That's what we did for hockey that had real food in it.
Yeah.
So that there was some real food, and maybe we still had the drive-through, but there was some nutrition. There was some fruit and vegetables somewhere in my car, and water, so that there was something for the kids to not, Yeah. And so eating is a big one. The other piece is I think we as parents often talk the talk and do not walk the walk. We've all been there. It's that come home from work with a glass of wine thing, or the parents who don't do drugs but they're getting stoned all the time. I think we have to be really mindful of what we say and what we do. And I've heard a lot of families say, well, I'm old enough and my brain's done developing, so it shouldn't matter to them what I'm doing. But I also think what you're teaching is, this is my coping skill. And so we've got to really be more transparent about, I'm struggling and this is what I'm going to do. So for example, modeling, go to therapy if you're struggling. Instead of saying to the kid, who's the identified patient in families often, you should go to therapy, but I'm not going to do that. The other piece is, I think I see a lot of kids where I know, because I'm the family doctor, that the both parents and the mom's mom and the dad's brother all have major mood disorders, and nobody in the room other than me knows that. And the kid doesn't know it. And I think what that does to that kid is makes that kid feel like something's wrong with them. And instead, I've seen really beautiful changes happen in families where when the kid starts to understand that others have had either mental health challenges or life challenges or trauma or what they've done to overcome their traumas, then that kid doesn't feel like something's wrong with them. Because we do that a lot. We sort of forget to share what we struggled with. And we're all subject to it. My son said to me, you made college sound really easy for you. And I said, are you kidding me? I was at an Ivy League college, pre-med. My mom was dying. Unfortunately, my mom died when I was in college. And so when I finally admitted to the kids I got a D in biology, both of my kids were like, why didn't you ever tell us that? We always thought you were straight A's. And I thought, oh, right. That would have helped. And so it really made a difference for the kid that's in college to know, like, you're going to have a hard time in classes. It's not going to be, nobody gets, the people who get straight A's they're out there, but that's not how most people's lives go. So we've all got to be, check ourselves and be a little bit more real, and then the kid will feel more comfortable knowing that they're not the pathology in the family. We're not going to just give you 7 labels and the rest of us just get to walk away. That's my biggest take home is I think we just need to be a little more honest with our kids. It goes a long way.
Wow, that's great. Well, anything else that you like when you're speaking or when you're out with youth and talking to them? Anything else that you regularly let them know? This is great, letting me know. What do you let the kids know, and do they hear you?
Some of them. I hope. I think that the biggest thing is be a trustworthy adult for kids that are either your kid or other kids. Be that person who says to your neighbor kid or your family friend, like, I'm here for you if you need me, and be there. I think that there's a lot of lip service paid to that, but I think we need to actually do it. So if there's a kid in your community that is struggling and you just don't know that their parents are tuning in, gently say, like, hey, I'm noticing that you used to be the kid at the front of the choir and you're back. Are you okay? Anything I can do? Because I think we see kids flounder as adults and we don't necessarily feel safe stepping in. And I think it's better to ask than to worry. And so, be that. And so kids will say that they often wish people noticed their struggle. The other thing I think I've learned from the kids I take care of and my family friends and my own kids is that sometimes we talk past them and they want us to talk to them. And so get around them, be at the dinner where you're just listening and connecting as opposed to talking past them. A lot of parents talk past their kids. And kids, they smell it a mile away. They're savvy.
And what's an example of that for those that don't know? What does that mean, talk past them?
So there's a lot of parents who sort of say to their kid, okay, Sally, you got a bad grade and this is what we're going to do. And they start to do problem solving at the kid. And they don't say, Sally, what do you think happened? And the kids who hear, I have that in my exam room. There's a kid I was talking to the other day and had a really challenging situation at home. And I said to her, so what were the holidays like? And she said, it was a nightmare because my parents at the big table with the whole family decided to announce to everybody that I was struggling and almost failing out of high school. Instead of pulling me aside and saying, how do you want to handle the fact that we're going to pull you out of high school and put you in a special program? Do you want to talk about it? Do you want everyone to know about it? And she said she felt so, they talked right past her. They didn't see her in the room. And, there's a being in there. They're sensitive. They're very sensitive creatures. We got to be really mindful of what helps them.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And respecting them as as a human being.
Little young adults,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. Yeah. Great. Well, this is great for me. That's, it's been super helpful. I've learned a lot.
Good.
Yeah.
And be hopeful for your daughter, because I'm telling you, I've seen a lot of kids in this area. I've been here long enough that I've seen the kids and now take care of them married with their first kid. Right?
Wow.
Take care of them, and now they're a nurse in our office or whatever. They're wobbling along, and then they find their footing. And I think the key is hang in there with them.
Yeah. That's so helpful. I needed to hear that today. Every day, right? But just hang in there and keep the faith, I guess.
Yeah.
And stay connected, which I'm grateful we are. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And this episode is going to be so valuable for our community. So thank you both, Dr. Jillian and Kathy, for being here today, and to the barn for letting us have this studio space. I know that we hope that this conversation proves to be a benefit to you and your parenting. We leave you with the foundation that healthy youth begins with healthy families, and healthy families build healthy communities.